morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. I greet you live from the All-America city of Morrisville in North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States of America. And on this show, we talk about global affairs, innovation, turbulence politically, economically, nationalism occurring around the world. And sometimes we feel like the ground is always moving beneath us. But we try on the show to be respectful and we have wonderful conversations. So we welcome you to the show. Before I begin my monologue to honor someone that the tennis world just lost, I wanted to first of all tell you that the Federal Reserve is expected to raise interest rates again to fight inflation. Some announcements are going to be made later today on that. There was COVID outbreaks, significant COVID outbreaks in China as they lifted their zero COVID policy. Elon Musk has gotten rid of the Trust and Safety Board. We're going to continue our discussion of Moore versus Harper and looking at the United States Congress and Senate and what it's going to be like going into the new year in 2023. And of course, a volcano, which was surprising, erupted and it sent water vapor 93 miles into space. I think the name of it was Hongalunga. And it was also could create tsunamis. And it was just incredible sonic kind of booms occurring from this volcano. We'll be talking about this and other issues, but I'm going to go a little bit over time today to take the liberty of honoring a Hall of Fame tennis coach who I have a connection with, Nick Bollettieri. Nick Bollettieri was a lawyer and a young, poor lawyer in Florida when he had the vision of starting a tennis academy. This was in the late 1970s. And he basically called it Victory Park, and he taught lessons. And then eventually he moved over to the Colony Beach Resort. And eventually Nick found land in Bradenton, Florida, and he started a tennis academy. Now, the academy concept was not popular at the time, but it started going like wildfire. And when I was a junior tennis player, it started coming in West Virginia, Columbus, and Cincinnati, Ohio, under the leadership of a man named Steve Contardi. And it was basically tennis pros on each court, teaching you a different stroke. One court would be forehands, one court would be backhands, one court would be volleys and serves. It was basically creating a tennis production environment like a factory. Well, Nick Bollettieri one day met a young tennis player by the name of Andre Agassi. He had never seen a kid hit a tennis ball like this. And apparently this kid wanted to be number one in the world. Nick went to Mr. Agassi, Mike Agassi, and he said, why don't you bring your son to train in my academy? This had never been done before, but Nick eventually took a bet on Andre, invested in his room and board, and Andre Agassi trained at the Nick Bollettieri Academy. Yes, his name changed from Agassian to Agassi, and the rest is history. In 1992, Andre Agassi hoisted his first Wimbledon trophy, his first Grand Slam. And while this was happening, you had Jim Courier, you had Monica Seles, you had the Williams sisters, Maria Sharapova, Tommy Haas, 7 number ones in the world. This man coached. Inspirational as an entrepreneur. Now, I'll tell you my personal connection is I had the honor of training at Nick's Academy as a young 14-year-old one summer because a man named Bill Weimer from Charleston, West Virginia, actually took the Bollettieri concept and created tennis academies and clubs in my hometown of Charleston. I trained at 2 of those facilities and went on to have a very successful junior tennis career, getting nationally ranked and eventually playing in college, winning 2 state championships. Never good enough to be a pro or at the elite level. But a couple of things I want to share with you about Bollettieri that I want to end my monologue with. Fast forward to 2002. I'm sitting on a tennis court in Cary, North Carolina, at these new courts apparently called the Cary Tennis Center. There was a 29-court facility to be built, and there was a man named Butch Young who came up to me. He was a coach from California. He actually worked for Nick Bollettieri, but he was in California on assignment, and Nick gave him a phone call and said, I'm an advisor to this tennis center in Cary because I'm an investor in the management company, and I'd like you to come teach. Butch got in a van with Cameron Moore, Keith Snavely, and they drove down, 2 of the coaches. When he saw my West Virginia hat on, he said, do you know Bill Weimer? I said, yeah, I grew up with his kids. And the rest was history. I was in between jobs. My first child had been born, and they brought me on board to teach and run the Cary Tennis Center as the head of corporate partnerships and business development. In that 2 years, I actually got to know Nick, not too well, but interacted with him. And a couple of takeaways as we talk on the show about his legacy. We are planning to bring in Butch Young, Cameron Moore, and Andy Andrews, and other tennis players to talk about Nick. It's just basically the minutes that he lived every day. From 5 in the morning, he would work out. He would go walk the grounds after a cup of coffee and a granola bar. He would teach until 12 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night. His market rate for private lessons was $800 an hour. Now, Nick was married, I think, 11 times, but the last wife was the longest, about 12, 15 years. But he often said that a lot of these players cost him his marriages because he was all in. But that's one thing to learn about Nick. He was all in, fighting every minute to make people better tennis players. But the most important thing is to learn that he never gave up. He taught each of his juniors to take every shot you can, to develop weapons better than anyone else in the world. 2 of them, he said, is all you need, and minimize your weaknesses. And if you can live life like that and with the passion and determination, you can succeed in business, in politics, in government. I don't know if Nick ever knew I was going to go into politics, but I want to thank him for the influence he had on me and an entire generation of tennis players. And on behalf of millions of tennis players around the world, we also wanted to thank him for giving us one of the greatest American generations of tennis. Agassi, Sampras, Courier, the Williams sisters, Maria Sharapova, Monica Seles. This was an era that will go remembered as one of the best eras in American tennis. Today, the Bollettieri Academy is being copied and mirrored in other places of the world, like the Rafael Nadal Tennis Academy in Mallorca, Spain. Some critics say that tennis in the U.S. is hurt because people are using the Bollettieri concept. But I just want to say we honor Nick Bollettieri today. He was a great champion, a great friend, a great leader, and a fiery competitor who, until his last breath on this earth, gave it his all. Let's get started today. We have Mark Lee with us, Dan Worthington, Chris Greco, Nick Paladiva. And guys, I'm sorry, I had to share that story today, but it was just an amazing story. And I wanted to begin with a positive note because, think about a man who just taught tennis lessons to make money through law school that it would eventually create. And one thing I forgot in my monologue is that the Bollettieri Academy eventually got acquired by IMG. And then it was a world famous, and Nick didn't even own his own name. And so when we ran the Cary Tennis Center, we asked him, can we use your name? And he looked at us and said, I don't own my own name anymore. But I mean, unbelievable. How many of you have watched these tennis players, right? And I remember today I went on a 5-mile run on the Greenway in 30-degree weather. And I dedicated my run to Nick because the one thing when he did teach us lessons, I remember him saying, it's always good to be a little uncomfortable. It's always good to be a little bit sore. It's always good to be a little bit hungry. And, I remember when we would get up at 4 a.m. to hit tennis balls, it didn't feel very good, but he said, one day you're going to thank me. And so for me, it paid off in my tennis career, which I was been able to translate into business and politics. But anyway, just wanted to share this story with all of you today.
Just to let you know, Steve, that then this really ages me here, but Dan will remember it, and Lee, I think will remember it. Is that the Chrissy Everett, all the great tennis players, Bork and the rest of them. I mean, all I can remember is Bork diving for balls, always diving for those things. I mean, he just like, why are you doing this? I mean, he would die. He'd end up with like these knees that would just be bloodied, and his calves and whatever else. But this guy he put everything into that game. And when I first started playing tennis back in 1969 or 70, just to mess around, I asked the guy, I said, do you know how to play tennis? And he goes, yeah, isn't it? It's just like ping pong, except you're staying on the table, right? So it was like, okay, that sounds good to us. So that's how we played tennis. But I mean, it's things like this that, when anybody impacts that many people, in a positive manner, I think that's worth noting. I don't see any problem with that.
He had a lot of flaws. He was he screamed at a lot of people. He was very arrogant, very fiery, but he had a heart and just a tremendous passion and living life every minute every minute that he lived his life to the fullest, all in. And I think that's what I walk away inspired as I begin my day to day, is if we could be the best we can be, no matter what, right? And but I mean, we're not going to spend the whole show on it. We are going to bring in Butch Young probably next week, who worked with me at the Cary Tennis Center, and Butch worked at the IMG and trained many of these top tennis players, and he knew Nick, and Nick was a huge mentor to him. And we're going to bring in some other players, but I just wanted to share that story with you, and we can get started with the events.
Wait, Steve, before we go to a different topic, first of all, I want to acknowledge what you said. The sacrifice that these people make is tremendous, but I don't want to forget about sometimes the coaches don't have the players' best interest in mind. We see that in the gymnastic world, unfortunately, where they sacrifice the mental health of some of these people for the coach's own glory.
Lee, it's interesting you bring that up because I was actually just talking to a friend of mine who's actually writing a book about that, and he's got a novel that he wants me to take a look at, and all in that space, because he was talking about how, unfortunately, and definitely I'm a big proponent of coaches and what coaches are all about, and all in that lane. But we do know that a lot of people, unfortunately, don't always have the best interest of their athletes in mind, and that is what the book is going to focus on, because as he's pointed out, some of the concussion protocols in the pros and some of the other protocols that exist are not being fair, and a lot of people are going into the athletic world with pipe dreams of fame and grandeur, and the success rate of those that make it, whether it's in tennis or in pros or in a number of other sports, are very low in terms of the amount of people that are trying to make it and those that actually make it to the professional
I'm sorry, Chris,
level.
before you go on.
Go,
Mark,
sure.
also, even once they make the pros, I mean, recently we had this quarterback who apparently sacrificed his marriage for his professional career to unretire.
And that's basically what and you're talking about Tom
Maybe.
Brady. That's what the book is about and everything. I do have to tease Chris about a athlete that I used to admire quite a bit, because he also sacrificed his body as well. There's a couple of athletes that I admired, including Arthur Ashe, and all in that space. But Arthur Ashe actually played against my dad, because my dad was part of the Algonquin Club, and he still has that paper going.
Wow.
They played against each other, and dad lost, but at least he has that claim to fame that he played against him when they were teenagers and all of that, because the Algonquin Club was a club that was specifically geared toward the African American community and getting those folks involved in tennis, even back in like the 50s, when I think Dad was playing in that particular epic match, and all in that space and everything. But there's a player that I know Chris probably doesn't like, because he's French, but he also sacrificed his body, by the name of Yannick Noah. But Yannick Noah used to fly all over the court and sacrifice himself, but he is a great French athlete, and all in that space. I'm going like probably not one of Chris's favorite players.
Yeah, it's. Right. I mean, I liked whatever the guy's name was, the great French skier. What was his name? It was back in the 1960s. He actually was a Tyrolean Alps guy. I actually skied in the same area, but it had just happened to be like, 25 years later or whatever it was. Than this guy. I can't remember what his name was. Killer, whatever his name is. But yeah, I have to tell you though, Mark, and I don't mean to get on this so quickly, but you're exactly right about this concussion protocols. I'll tell you, I talked to a data analyst very recently about this, and I said, I don't understand why all of a sudden the concussion protocols are coming into play so heavily, other than the liability aspect and everything else. And he said what was happening was, and this is really sad and it's very racist, but this is how concussion protocols were being done. Is basically what was happening was they were measuring the cognitive relationship that a player had at the point of concussion to a standard. And the standards for Americans of African descent were lower than the standards for whites. So what was happening is that if you notice, the amount of Americans of African descent have terrible brain injuries, and the reason was because that they were measured by a different standard than the white player having that same type of concussion. And so now all of a sudden they've changed that, and they've noticed now that they're treating that in an equal sense, and all of a sudden now they're starting to have less traumatic brain injury with the Americans of African descent, because the standard is now changed so that everyone is treated in an equal sense. So that, I mean, this is where data can kill people. You sit back and you go, okay, I'm going to measure this against a standard, and that standard is going to be lower because, of course, Americans of African descent have a lower cognitive ability than those individuals that are of white nature. So that's where things are all of a sudden starting to, and that's why the concussion protocols are much different they are now than they were even 5 years ago. Is because all of a sudden they changed those standards. So, I mean, this data analyst, when he told me, I sat back and I said, this is craziness. Why did this happen? And he says, well, because that's the way that they're treated. That's the way that the African Americans, the Americans of African descent, were treated differently than Americans, whatever you call it, European descent. And I think, geez, oh man, and it was totally inadvertent. And I think, really. Okay, we can accept it from there, but that was a major issue.
A minor footnote, Steve. Nick Botticelli went to the University of Miami Law School, UB, where I went to law school. So just to let you know, the most famous thing he did was to move out of law and, of course, create the very famous tennis camp.
Yeah, he was just a great entrepreneur, and I'm writing on a blog for TechWire, but I think entrepreneurs can learn a lot from Bollettieri, right? Take risks, have passion.
Yeah, he was a pioneer in the tennis world. Yeah, in terms of
pioneer and relentlessly train, and they were like factories. I mean, I remember it. You would get there and you would just do forehands for an hour and a half, and then you do backhands for an hour and a half. Then you'd have lunch. Then you do volleys. Then you do serve. Then you do play. Then you go to the gym and work out. And it was a great way to train tennis rather than the old days of just private lessons. And of course, him and Agassi had a falling out, and I think Andre, but they reconnected towards the end there. And Andre, the celebration of his life will be on March 23rd. Right?
And I think this is important to bring up the Malcolm Gladwell Outliers. Anybody wants to read that book? That book is absolutely amazing. And I'll tell you what he proved. He went to all these different people, whether it be Bill Gates or whether it be the Beatles or whatever it was, and proved that once you have 10,000 hours. Yeah. That's right, 10,000 hour rule. Once you have 10,000 hours, you're an expert. You're an expert in whatever you do. So if you touch that tennis ball over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and you keep doing that, and it's funny because even at soccer, if football in the United States, soccer, you sit back and you say, why are we doing it as 3-year-olds? Why are we taking 3-year-olds and putting them out there? And I'm telling you right now, I was a coach, soccer coach for little kids and whatever else. And I'll tell you something I did. It used to drive the parents nuts. Was all I would do would have them, do a front kick, a side foot kick, and they go, why aren't they playing? I said, because they don't understand the basic maneuvers. They have to understand that before you move on. It's like telling a person to go drive. Just go drive a car. Don't teach them.
Go ahead, along those same lines, and it was interesting that you bring that up because I was actually going to write about it in a blog that I'm getting ready to rebirth at some point because I'd had it for a while, then I took it off and all in that space. But I was talking to a gentleman about soccer actually because of the World Cup, and he's actually making his predictions. He actually thinks we're going to have a rematch of the last World Cup, and it'll be France against Croatia. And he thinks that France will, unfortunately, Chris, take the title. But one thing that we were having, because we've actually been to the same restaurant 2 out of the last 3 days, and we were having this conversation about the nature of sports. And he was saying that the reason he thinks that certain teams are doing better, and I think European teams have won the last 4, and this might be the 5th of the World Cups, is because that the splashy play has gone away. We were talking about tennis, and it used to be splashy play, and those players that were willing to sacrifice their body were the big ones that were the winners, and that's part of the reason of Brazil's success and everything. But he was also talking about how organization and being very much organized, which is what Croatia has and a number of the other teams have, is what is winning the day these days. And he also said that the game has become more physical, and we've also heard that from other sports as well, even some of the people that are frustrated by some of the rules that have been imposed in basketball, because it sometimes takes away from the fundamentals of the game and it makes it more of a spectator driven sport with the dunks and everything else that goes on, and of course the 3-point shooting and all in that space. But I was just wondering your thoughts about that theory, and that it is less the splashy plays that are out there in any sports, and has become more about being organized, and definitely physicality is winning now as well in these sports lanes.
And Chris, you also talk about the 10,000 hours. It's really important when you put in the 10,000 hours, okay? Because this is the reason I'm a big advocate of early childhood education. If you get a chess player, because I used to coach chess players, and it used to be years ago, oh, you can't teach elementary kids. I started in high school because there was a myth elementary kids couldn't play, which is totally wrong. But the thing is, if you put in those 10,000 hours, let's say grades 5 through 10, okay, and you spend 10,000 hours in that time, and you do it from age 10 to 15, it's a total different result if you do it from age 65 to 70. I'm sorry, when you get older, you're washed up, at least in chess. You have no chance once you're above 30. But the younger kids, if you give me a young kid who's age 10 and I get to coach him all the way till age 15, I can make a great player out of him. But if you give me somebody who's 30 and I coach him to 35, you can forget it. And see, what we've done in this country is a great disservice to our children, because we treat them like idiots. They could learn medicine.
Right.
They can learn law. They can learn financial education.
Yes.
But you know what? Let's give them tinker toys to play with. And so this is the reason the United States is going to continually be so far behind the rest of the developing world.
Well, something, Nick, I taught middle school at one point in time. Now, the thing is there's nothing wrong with tinker toys. There's nothing wrong with, log. There's nothing wrong with that. What you have to do is you have to give them a curriculum with that. Basically, you have to say, okay, look, if you're going to do this, let's try build something. What do you want to build? I want to build a rocket ship. Okay, build your rocket ship. Go ahead and build it. And you watch them, you guide them. You don't make sure that they just build the rocket ship that's a common rocket ship, but then you ask them, why are you putting this here? Why are you doing this? Why? You ask them questions, and they'll answer your questions. They'll say, well, you need a wall here, or this needs to happen here. All of a sudden, you get that's how you get the brain thing going. And you talk about soccer, Mark, and you talk about different aspects. So I coached elementary school girls at one point in time. And at one point I was the assistant coach. After about the fourth game, the coach came up to me and said, you know something, you know more about this than I do. Go ahead and take over. Just take over the team. So I started to take over the team. And what I taught them was strategy. Like, here's where you need to stand. Here's where you need to go. Here's what you need to look for. Here's what you need to do. All of a sudden, the team started winning games, not because they were, skillfully better. It was because they could think 2 moves ahead. Like, all of a sudden the ball's here. I'm not going to go to the ball. I'm going to go where I think that ball might go. So all of a sudden it was chess on the field. And once you can get that in your head, then life is good. Same thing with tennis or any type of sport you have. So, I mean, it's that, I love being an intelligence officer. I love being that because you could do that. And speaking of that, and I hate to drop off the sports thing, but if you bring up my, share screen, I wanted to go over something really quick about South America. So this is me as a former intelligence officer here. Okay, so here's what's happening right now in Peru. You have this massive election problem. Okay, Castillo is having his troops basically come up and say, nope, I don't want to Boyard. I don't want her anymore. We don't want her anymore. So they're going to go through this massive strike. This is what's happening in Peru. What's happening in Ecuador? Same thing. The exact same thing is happening in Ecuador. You have 2 countries right next to one another that are basically going unstable. What's happening in Colombia? Already unstable. What's happening in Venezuela? Venezuela is already unstable. What's happening in Brazil? Instability. Lulu is trying really hard to get Brazil going, but you're having a problem here. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries, a major country in South America that is really giving you a problem. And what's going to happen is you're going to have all kind of issues come up here through El Paso and come up come up right into the United States. Right now, we're having this massive immigration issue that is a problem. Title 24 is about to go away on December 21st. You're going to have all these people that are having a problem in Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela. They're going to start coming up through Central America, right up into U.S. This is what's going to happen, folks. You're going to have all kind of problems. And what's going to happen in Peru is Lima. If you take a look at Lima and you take a look at where it is, it's on the Pacific Ocean, folks. So now you're going to have the Pacific Ocean area, and what's going on in the Pacific Ocean? There's French Polynesia right here. They're doing a lot of trade with Peru. So now the French are going to get involved, and that's why they want to have this a French exclusion zone, is because they want to have just trade with the countries they choose to have trade with. So it's definitely an issue. I just wanted to bring that up.
No, there was some other world things I was going to get to as well. I know that Steve's got some. I was just going to bring in. It's also good when speaking just back to sports just for a hot second, when folks have the legacy of working together, because as y'all were talking, I was actually thinking about somebody from Durham that has passed on many years ago, but many folks will remember the name Leroy Walker, but they will also remember the name Al Bueller, and they actually worked together and actually trained integrated teams together, because it was between Duke and North Carolina Central. So just seeing that kind of unity and allegiances that can happen across racial lines and across other kinds of lines was a beautiful piece of history that is from here in Durham, and showed that how folks could work together that are both considered legends and everything, because Leroy Walker actually was part of the Olympic committees and things of that nature, and of course has a whole building named after him at Central. And Al Bueller was a great coach over there at Duke, but they did work together for a number of years and trained their teams together, and both of the teams did exceptionally well. And Central used to get a lot of their players, guess from where, at least historically, because I think they had a strong tennis program. I know that back in the day they had a strong track program, and they got a lot of their players and athletes from the African nations. And that was one of the international things I was getting ready to get to, because there's an African summit going on, and Biden is bringing several African countries to this area, and all in that space where he's going to try to lay out some African agenda. And part of the concern is that the U.S. and other parts of the West want to woo Africa away from China, because a lot of them are going to China right now, and all in that space. So they're saying that it could be a serious political challenge for Biden to win over some of these nations that have gotten support and got their infrastructure. One of these favorite words.
Yeah, and why is that a challenge, Mark? Why is that? Let me tell you why that's a challenge. It's because our president Obama went over there in 2014, but not went over, but said we're going to have this. Oh, we're going to have this massive thing going on, and you know what they called it? They called it a waste of business opportunity for a photo opportunity. That's what they called it. And not me, they called it that. The media called it that. And Al Jazeera called it that, which I think is really, really interesting. You know, let me tell you something. Blinken gets in front of the group and says, we want to make sure that we give Africa the ability to make their own decisions. Bull crap. What they're going to do is they're going to shove money at whatever country has the most resources that we need. I know that for a fact. If I wasn't still top secret SCI cleared, I would give you the data on those facts. But the bottom line is that we do not at this point in time care about African independence or anything of that bullcrap. What we're caring about is the raw stuff that comes out of there. Lots and lots of resources. So Biden is doing his cowardly aspect that he does with everything in his life, and he's decided he's going to bring the Africans. Oh, we're going to bring the Africans here, and we're going to get together, and we're going to have this great photo op so that life is good, and I can get reelected in 2024, even though I can't remember which way to go off stage after a speech. He had to have a little girl help him get him off the frickin' stage. Cut me a break.
He's a young baby.
And everything in that space for the U.S.
Africa Leaders Summit.
Even
So there are 49 leaders
what
that
is
are
our
coming
policy
and
in
everything.
Latin America? Do we have?
We don't have a good policy in Latin America, and
we don't have any policy in Latin America. What's our plan for Latin America?
If we had stronger democracy, like I said, it comes down to the problem is that free and fair elections, which we always celebrate, is not enough. How many of these countries we've had elections, and the next thing you know, there's a tank rolling through, and they go and they storm the Capitol and take over because as this one book I want to recommend called The Narrow Corridor. It's that democracy only works if you have strong respect for civil rights, human rights, but you have a strong government that can prevent chaos. And despite how much we criticize the United States, we still have a strong republic. The American form of democracy has really worked. And, we can.
Sorry, Steve, why is that? Is there a predictor which countries are stable and which countries are not? And is America falling apart?
No, but
I don't.
I think America's pretty stable.
Yeah,
I think we're stable. But Steve and
as a Democrat,
I was just going to bring up a couple of things really quickly, and I'd love to hear everybody talks about it. But many of the African leaders said that they were food once. To your point, Chris, they definitely said that first summit in 2014 that they were looking to have a lot of things done by Obama. And I've even said before that even some of the activists were expecting Obama to do things that he did not do. But instead, Obama actually cut funding to combat AIDS in Africa and reduce foreign aid to that particular region. And I'm just going to read a quote, and then I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about it, from one of the ambassadors to one of those countries. So David Shin, former ambassador to Ethiopia, who has extensive diplomatic experience across Africa, said, Africa has always been at the bottom of the U.S. foreign policy priority list. And this is equally true for the Biden administration. The U.S. will pound on the table and say, you've got to clean up your act and engage in free and fair elections, while the Chinese just hold their nose and basically deal with the government in charge. So Africa is important to the U.S. as a growing market for American products, as well as a source of commodities, including cobalt and lithium, essential to the U.S.'s rapidly expanding electric vehicle industry. I would also argue the phone industry and a number of other industries as well. So do we need to ignore Africa, or how do we need to handle this based on what folks are saying we are doing there?
I'll take a stab at that, but I want to first of all, I think Africa is a growing market, over 1 billion people. And I think it's going to be a huge opportunity for businesses to expand, tremendous entrepreneurship. And so I do think Africa is also the elephant in the room that we don't talk about. I can tell you many Nigerians are really great entrepreneurs, high levels of education, PhDs, doing a lot of really great things in North Carolina. And we don't often hear about Nigeria in terms of all the things that happen. Now they have the set of challenges with what's going on with their democracy. But, before we get to that, the lead answer your question, I think we just have got it right in America. I don't think democracy might be under attack. It might be threatened by the division we have. But at the end of the day, I tend to be an optimist. You can't storm the Capitol of the United States because you will go to jail. You can break a few chandeliers and windows.
I agree.
But it's just not accepted in America. And so we're not going to, I think sooner or later, hopefully the politics.
The FBI has it well under control. The FBI has it well under control.
Well,
so if you put up, I agree with you. Mark, if you put up my share screen real quick, I just want to point out something here that's happening just in 2 countries, in Africa. So here's Ethiopia right here, up in the top northeast area of Ethiopia. They're having all kind of issues because there's an area up here right by Mekelle that evidently is causing an issue with main Ethiopia. They want to break away like Eritrea did. Because of that, they have put in all kind of anti-insurgent, anti-terrorist actions and everything else to clear out this area. Guess where they're going? They're going to Zambia. That's where they're going. They're trying to get through. You know why? Because Zambia said, we'll accept you. And why is that? Because Zambia is a very is a very good country. It's almost like, and let me tell you, it's almost like South America trying to come here, or Central America trying to come here, because this is a better country than what they're escaping. So Tanzania is not that great. I mean, Kenya's getting there. I mean, but Ethiopia. So they're going through these states, and they're allowing them to do that to be able to get to Zambia, to be able to get a better life. So I mean, they're doing a lot of things that we, as Americans, we would like to. I'd like to bring in people that want a better life, that want to contribute to America, that want to contribute to those types of things. Well, that's what they're doing with Zambia. And guess what's happening in Zambia? They're having all kind of issues. They're having immigration issues. They're trying to figure out where to put these people. They're trying to figure out how to clothe them, how to feed them, how to bring them into the economy, all these different areas. So Zambia is having all kind of problems with that. But you notice in this area right in here, Namibia and Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, all these areas, South Africa, they're actually doing okay. they're actually doing very well. And then you get back up in here and you got all kind of problems in these areas, right in this area here.
Hey, Chris, you're going to love this quote from one of the other people, Zenet Adams, who was the former director of the Horn of Africa section of South Africa's Department of Internal Relations and Cooperation, said, African leaders don't want their countries to become, quote unquote, a playground for world powers using that continent for their Cold War initiatives.
Agreed. Yes. I agree. We ought to get the hell out of there. Wherever we are, we ought to just say, something. What happens is there's either cooperation or defection, right? So if we go out, it's just gonna that gap is just gonna be filled by another superpower who wants
China
that area, and that's the problem.
Right. China is very active in Africa.
Oh my God, yeah.
China is very active.
China's totally active.
So it's disingenuous for those countries to say that when they're taking money from the Chinese hand over fist. Also, some of the religiously extreme groups are down there handing out money, trying to influence the government and everything else. So, the problem is it's not stable. The United States has to have presence and involvement simply because it has strategic interests, and simply because, there are human rights issues as well that we should be concerned about. So, I mean, it's a part of being a good world citizen, but America also has to consider its own interests.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, Steve,
Dan, if we're bumping heads with China so much, why do we send our manufacturing over there?
Well, I mean, I just said a lot of the items things that are over there that are needed for great goods that are in the electronics fields and all in that space. Just the computer that we're using probably has half of that lithium and other things that are coming from the African continent. But Steve, one of the things I was going to ask, is Steve still around? Yeah, but I was going to ask you and everything is I did see that, we've been talking about the world, but we also talked earlier about inflation, and they are said that inflation eases more than expected in November to 7.1%, and consumer prices have remained elevated. But India's inflation has eased below 6% for the first time in 2022. So it looks like the Indian economy is doing better. And I'm just wondering your thoughts around that, and if that's what you're hearing from some of your friends in that community, because that's something that I saw reported in Bloomberg.
Well, all I'm hearing, and I'm going to leave in 5 minutes. I have to head over to the General Assembly, but to meet Congressman-elect Nickel. But he's going to be coming on a show in a few weeks. But first of all, I think people are very excited about in India. The economy is growing, fifth largest economy in the world. Tremendous investments in their infrastructure, broadband, Wi-Fi, developing entrepreneurs, a lot in the tech and life sciences. So I think India is definitely got its eyes on the prize. As China's economy slows, China's gone down into the single digits. They were doing the double-digit GDP growth. Now they've slowed a bit. So I think India's got the chance to really make it. Of course, they've got the challenges of poverty, still high levels of illiteracy in the villages, tremendous bribery and corruption in the government. But I do think Prime Minister Modi, a bit controversial in terms of his crackdowns on Islamic and Christian minorities, but I think he's trying to pull, for the first time in India's history. I think the thing people don't understand about India is that India is, and I learn a lot about this in Morrisville every day, is a lot of different states that really are autonomous and independent, like their own nation. So there really is no one India. I mean, whether you're from Punjab, whether you're from Gujarat, where Prime Minister Modi's from, where my wife's family is from, whether you're from Tamil Nadu, where my dad grew up, Maharashtra, where Mumbai is, they all have their own language. They all have their own dialect. They all have their own cuisine. And for years, India was struggling with that. But now I can tell you, there is a national strategy in India from the prime minister. And meanwhile, you have an Indian who is the son of immigrants from India, who is the prime minister of Great Britain, which I found to be very, very interesting, right? So I think only time will tell, where India will go. But I do think that the fact that their inflation is low, consumer spending is up. If I were a businessman, I would be selling hard into India. And I think it's an opportunity for energy as well. Energy companies to get out there and actually get into India because they're looking to upgrade their power grid, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
No, that makes a lot of sense. There's a very popular country, at least it's popular now because they're in the middle of we talked at the beginning about sports. It's in the middle of a major sports event and all in that space. And it's in the news for a not great reason and everything. And some people are wondering about the ways that Qatar, which is a very rich nation, chose to spend its money and some of the lives that were sacrificed. I even know some people that are somewhat boycotting and watching the World Cups because of where it is this year. And by the way, it'll be in the North Americas in 2026. I think it's going to be shared by Canada, the US, and Mexico in that particular year. But a lot of folks were already upset when Qatar got it. And then I just recently learned that the European Parliament has removed Eva Kaili as vice president because of Qatar corruption allegations. So they're saying that she was arrested over the weekend in an investigation into alleged bribery by Qatar. So I guess if you got that kind of money, then you can go there and bribe the politicians and all in that space. So she is a Greece politician and served as a member of the European Parliament since 2014. And the decision to remove her title and position in Brussels comes after Belgian authorities arrested her on Sunday. So they decided to terminate the term of her office as a vice president. And that's the only directly elected institution of the EU and all in that space. But what are our thoughts about some of these folks that have money that are also small countries and apparently are going around bribing some of the politicians, not just here in the US, but around the world? And like I said, Qatar is currently hosting the Soccer World Cup, and they have rejected accusations of bribery. But apparently somebody's at least the beginning of the pyramid starting to topple. Who knows who else might topple as well. But I didn't know if anybody had any thoughts around that news that has come out as well.
Mark, you sound surprised.
I'm never surprised by some of
Sounds a
these.
little bit surprised that these people being bribed.
I'm missing a lot of World Cup. There's a match this afternoon, so I hope I get the end of it before my council meeting. But
yeah, that's France against Croatia, and nothing surprises me. But I do have something that might surprise Dan, because it was another news story that I saw that was not in that lane, but it involved politics and some of the ways that our education system is. But apparently there is a person in the LGBTQIA community that was a SEAL and all in that space. And I forgot the person's name and all in that way. But they're actually saying that they now want to deprogram themselves back to their way of life before and everything. And they made the accusation that there are a lot of clinics around that after you speak to them for an hour and all of that will tell you that you need to change your gender and all in that space. So they said there's like some of these gender orientation, I guess, clinics that are popping up around the nation that are actually encouraging people to go into the transgender lifestyle and all in that space. And I'm trying to pull up the article, but it's one that I found.
I read that. I read that article, and that's interesting.
There were a few articles on Epic Times.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and it was also other places. But the interesting thing about that is that much of this transgender issue is really caused by mental illness and depersonalization. These things can happen to people in extreme circumstances, or within the case of kids, while they're trying to develop their identity while they're young. And it isn't just gender; it's everything. That's when they're most vulnerable. And so for these quacks to be purveying this kind of BS is very dangerous to our children. And for parents to be buying it up is really dangerous to the children. Now, I don't doubt that there is gender dysphoria. I believe there is. And I also believe there are some people who get caught up in all that. So I think it's a legitimate diagnosis. And it has been. However, that doesn't mean that people have all kinds of problems in their lives, right? Whether it's alcoholism or drug addiction or whatever it happens to be. These issues have to be addressed, and I think just like anything, that the answer to that question is developing a relationship with God and coming to an understanding of what's best and most important in your life, in your morality, in your sense of being a good person. And what it is you want to be and do. Now, there are some people that will make the decision long term that it's in their best interest to go one way, others the other way. But no one should be making a quick decision about these things because there are many, many things to consider, and it's very, very harmful to their future and their bodies and to their mental status and everything else to jump in this thing unless they take great care and time for the transition. The other thing is if they end up being butt ugly, they're never going to pass in public, and they're always going to be subject to ridicule. That is a problem, because uh, people notice these things. So so they're always going to have some level of discrimination against them, just because that's the way people are. It isn't. They're never. So and it doesn't. And we're never going to be free of that kind of thing in our society.
Hey guys,
There are countries all around the world. Oh, okay,
I've got
you got to go.
Yeah, I've got to run. I just want to close out with, and I'll open up my monologue tomorrow. But today in Morrisville, we have Guri Burmi returning. Inspiring story, and that he rode a motorbike all the way from California to from Morrisville, and he did it to raise money for juvenile diabetes because he lost his job during a tech layoff, and
Right.
his nephew got diagnosed with JDR, juvenile diabetes, and he's on his way back. And so we're greeting him at 5 o'clock this evening. But amazing what people can do, how they're helping others like this. And I can't believe driving a motorbike in the winter. So anyway, I'm trying to bring him on the show next week to talk about his experiences. But be safe wherever you are, and I will see you tomorrow morning.
All right, so we're going to continue going on and everything. I think Sasha was going to make a point before Steve was telling us what was going on in that story and everything. But Sasha, I turn it back to you.
A few corrections. Number one, the first semifinal today is Croatia against Argentina, not France.
No, I said Croatia against France is what is predicted to be the finals, is what I was trying to say. If I did not say
Croatia.
that.
So you believe that Croatia will overcome Argentina, yes?
That is what people are saying. Yes, they're saying it's going to be Croatia against France in the finals, according to what my conversation with some soccer lovers were. But you may disagree. And like I said, I've not been following enough of the match to make.
No, I wouldn't say that I disagree. I admire Croatian team, their tenacity, their strategy, their players. It's a top-notch team. And I will not be surprised at all if they will overcome Argentina. After all they have to do is to close Lionel Messi and detach him from the rest of the team, because they don't have too many talented players except Lionel Messi, who is unique and who's perhaps the greatest player of all time. But now he's 35, so obviously he's not the same Lionel Messi who was 10 years ago or so. However, Croatia is based on, first of all, don't forget that in Croatia, the most popular game after soccer is chess.
Mm-hmm.
Even their uniform is like a chessboard.
Right.
They are very great admirers of the game, and they learn strategy very early in their childhood. By the way, great Gary Kasparov lives in Croatia, if you'd like to know. So the strategy of them and the way they build their game is very similar to chess. They control the center of the board, like in chess. So in soccer, they control the center of the play, and they have fantastic disciples of the strategy. They are the middle field players are second to none. They have three of them. They have Brozovic, Modric, and Kovacic. Modric is playing for Madrid Real, one of probably the top team in the world. Brozovic is playing in Inter Milan, which is the top club in Italy, and Kovacic is playing in English Premier League in, I believe, he's playing in Chelsea. So you have fundamental a strong, very strong group of players, and who are united by the same strategy. Unlike other games, team sports, chess, so I'm saying is soccer, is very strategic game. There are a lot of coaches who are preparing team to play against different team. And for example, for Brasilia, it could be one plan of the game, and for Argentina, it will be another plan. And their coach Dalic, he is a very, very gifted professional, and he's preparing his team for each particular opponent one at a time. Also, they're extremely strong psychologically. They're winning almost all their games on penalty kicks. So if you're going into penalty kicks with Croatia, it's done. They have superior goalie, and they have fantastic people who controls their nerves. Unlike Harry Kane from England, couldn't control his nerves when he kicked second penalty and missed it. Although there are some explanations, psychological as well, that there was obvious penalty, right? The way they showed it, it was obvious to me that it was penalty, no question asked. However, it was not awarded immediately. And if it would, Harry Kane would put the ball and he would just kick it and it would be a score for sure. No, he went to see the VAR system, the replays, and all the stuff. And it took minutes, 2, 3, 4 minutes. So when Harry Kane finally, when he was awarded, he already spent so many nerves on whether there will be penalty, whether it will be awarded or not, or so on. He was already washed down. Maybe the best solution in this case would be to give it to score to somebody else, like Harry Maguire could have done it, and maybe even Rashford. But, well, Kane, we know the story. Unfortunately, it's done and nothing could repair it. So today, Argentina has incredible task. All world is for Argentina and Messi to win this championship, especially as Brazil is out, England is out, many other strong teams. If you take quarterfinal matches, take 4 losers of those matches. Who are the 4 losers? Brasilia, Holland, Netherlands, you have Portugal, and you have I forgot what other team would have been. There is one more team. Sorry, I forgot. Probably one that lost to. Oh, wait a sec. England, of course. Okay. So you have 4 teams. Think about their names: England, Portugal, Brazil, and Holland. Each of these 4 teams could become a world champion. Mm-hmm. Each of the 4, not just Brazil, not just England, but even the other 2. The Holland could be. They have a lot of talented players, very spirited team. So soccer is becoming a game of such a concentration, such a combination of strategy, great skills. Because, for example, Croatia, although they have Luka Modric, but they don't have Lionel Messi. So
Sasha?
if you have 2 teams, yes, sure.
Yeah, just your thoughts on this. And when it comes to the Olympics, China is up there when it comes to the number of medals. Why is China absent when it comes to soccer? Any thoughts?
You'll be surprised if China will catch with soccer in the next probably 10, 15 years. As a matter of fact, Japan never had strong soccer team, but look at what they're doing now. They're very, very skillful team. They could have gone farther. And if South Korea had a great team and they went quite far. So if China and South Korea could do it, Japan and South Korea, I think China will be next. Vietnamese team is pretty strong. They didn't qualify for this World Cup, but well, think about it. There are almost about 200 teams, national federations in world soccer body, and only 32 best teams are qualified for this
Hey,
world championship.
hey, Sasha, just really quickly, two things. One, I did not realize until I was talking to that new acquaintance, new friend, and everything about the age of Pelé, who was definitely a soccer legend that I grew up enjoying and watching. But I did not realize that it was 58, even before I was born, when he was like 18, that he won his first championship. And apparently, he's still alive at like the age of 82 and all in that space. And even though he recently was in the hospital, but he is still living and kicking and is definitely a legend. But that's just one thing I was going to mention. But the other thing I was curious to hear your thoughts about is that I think there are 32 teams in the World Cup, and even coming back to at least quite around China. But the gentleman who I think is from one of the Middle Eastern or one of those other kinds of countries, it might even be one of those connected with India. I need to ask him that the next time I see him. But he did tell me that the next one, the one that's supposed to be here in the United States, that they're going to be up to 48 teams. And I was just wondering, as a sports fan, if that is something that you are in favor of. Apparently, it's already a done deal. And will we see it eventually going up to like 64 or some ridiculous other amount of teams? Or what do you think about this notion? I'm thinking part of this is because of the money factor, and that some of those smaller smaller countries can possibly get a shot, even though what he also told me is he thinks that the major powers that you just named will still stay in power. But I was just wondering your thoughts of going from 32 to 48, which is apparently what the 2026 World Cup will have.
Before this World Championship, I fancy more the European Championship to the World Championship. Why? Because European Championship had 16 teams. Mm-hmm. So they were the best of the best. And even from the qualifying matches, every match was so interesting and what such a pleasure to watch. Now, with this World Championship, I now changing my mind because so essentially in European soccer championship, the only two really contender teams were missing was Brazil and Argentina. So if you would have 16 top European teams and add Brazil and Argentina, that's the end of story. You have the best of the best and you don't need anybody else. But now soccer progressed a great deal in Asia, in Africa. Look at Morocco made the semifinal, mm-hmm. And there are a lot of other strong African teams that with time could become only stronger. And there are Asian teams on the rise. Well, look at the results of South Korea and Japan. And if indeed China will go there and Vietnam will qualify. Well, look at even Iran. Iran lost eventually to United States and was disqualified from continuing. But even the Iranian team was not that bad. I don't like their style of soccer, but if you'll take their result, it's plausible. So now I think that soccer is taking new directions. There are still dominant European soccer. The European clubs are superb, second to none. Real Madrid, if you take all English Premier League stuff like Manchester City, Manchester United, Chelsea. So there's abundance of great teams, Bayern, Munich, to name a few. So for China to get anywhere close to that level, they need to build up infrastructure of all the great clubs, because the soccer really comes from the club, where the national team selects their players from the club. So if there are no clubs, there is no national team. You cannot create national team out of nothing. So you need to build up clubs, you need to have the competition. It's a process. It may take 10, maybe 15 years, but it's doable. Africa didn't have that soccer level of soccer even 4 years ago. Never mind 8 years, 20 years. In all history, only one African team, I think it was Nigeria, they did credible performance in by the way, the only championship was held in the United States in 1994, which Brazil won on penalty kick against Italy. So there was There was no Nigeria. I remember Argentina beat them in very intense game with a score of 4-2.
Yeah.
So you already could appreciate the level of soccer there. So
Oh yeah, definitely. And some people will be wondering when the U.S. can actually become a world contender as well, because there's all those other sports that are involved in that space. I know we're going to wrap up. One of the other things I was going to say just really quickly, Lee, and maybe we'll talk about this on tomorrow's. I know one of your favorite topics is definitely personal responsibility, and that's actually where I was going, even in the conversation around the trans individual, because part of what they seemed to be doing was blaming the pharmaceuticals and everything else, but not taking their own personal responsibility. And I've even seen that with some of the people that have been looking at some of the colleges that they went to and then wanted to get deprogrammed from those colleges, be they liberal
Mark, you
or
can't blame the
conservative
kids,
colleges.
We don't blame the children in this. We blame the adults.
Right. That makes sense. And like I said, but sometimes we also have to have the kids take responsibility for some of the decisions that they make. And that's one of the things that I think that in some cases they weren't like exactly young kids. They were like closer to their early 20s or even mid 20s.
Well, those aren't kids.
Huh?
Those are not kids. Once you say in their early 20s.
Right. And that's when some of those decisions are made, because they've come out of the military or out of schools and things of that nature.
Decisions. You know, and I feel sorry for anybody that struggles with those issues.
Right.
It's a serious mental health problem. I feel very sorry for them. But you know, when you make choices like that, you have to bear the consequences of those choices.
No, and I agree with you.
Part of the world, right? I mean, you can't be insulated from it. And I think that the problem with the LGBTQI community, I don't know what I means, is that they want to do all this stuff and they don't want to have the consequences for their choices, right?
Yeah.
And so their political push is to insulate them from the consequences of their choices, which in God's scriptures are immoral, right?
That's
so. I mean, they can do it. I mean, they're free to do it, but then they have to suffer the consequences both here and in the afterlife.
Dan, I'm not sure that they're free to do it. We don't let people amputate healthy limbs, do we?
Well, no.
There can be some argument.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and that means that the protocols have to be. See, I think the problem is now we have the prisoners running the institutions. That people who are sick and have this disability are many of the psychologists, the medical professionals that are actually supporting the institutions. Why the protocols and standards have been reduced, and why they're so pro doing all this, right?
Yeah,
and there's two reasons.
Yeah,
one is they got free guinea pigs, and also the money.
Lee and Dan, we've got to wrap up and everything, but we can bring the conversation in tomorrow. I know that Sasha's got his show coming up as
Mark, you're a party pooper.
We've got other shows coming up, so we're going to get on out of here, but we can definitely continue the conversation both offline.
Y'all have a good day. God bless.
Later on.
Bye, everybody.
Take care of yourself.